K.M. பணிக்கரால் கொடுக்கப்பட்டிருப்பவைகளுள் சில வரிகளைக் கொடுக்கிறேன். The inscriptions of Ashoka begin in the third person as King Devanam Priya Priyadarshin speaks thus. Ashoka soon changes into the first person singular and tells about his past life and his present thoughts of what he considers ethical and unethical. Only once is the name Ashoka used. The usual style is to give the title Devanam Priya Priyadarshin, beloved of the gods of gracious mien. Here is an example which well illustrates what is said above. The following is the text of the 11 Rock Edict. Thus saith the king Priyadarshan, beloved of the gods, there is no such gift as the gift of Dhamma, to wit, acquaintance with Dhamma and kinship with Dhamma. There in this happiness, seemly behavior towards slaves and servants, meritorious hearkening to father and mother, meritorious gifts to friends, acquaintances and relatives, and to brahmanas and shramanas, and meritorious non-slaughter of animals. This might be said by a father, a son, a brother, a master, a friend, or acquaintance, nay, even neighbors. This is meritorious. This ought to be done. He who does it in this manner accomplishes the worldly life and obtains infinite spiritual merit through the gift of Dhamma. But Ashoka never forgot that he was a king as well, and the religion he espouses in his inscriptions is more a system of morals than a sectarian creed. He recommends charity, good conduct, respects for parents and elders, ascetics and Brahmins, and above all, non-injury, ahimsa, towards all. He emphasizes the virtue of unity in the family and affectionate family behavior, and takes care to tell us that in his own case, practice and precept are not at variance. He informs us that the use of meat to please the royal palate has been reduced to the minimum, and the favorite sports of the kings, hunting, has been given up, and that the entire nation is regarded as a happy family with the king presiding over its destinies. He became enthusiastic about seeming to many a degree that his ideas affected the life of the people. He disapproved of fairs and popular sports. Later, he banned the slaughter of many animals and birds, but as most of these were generally not used for food, the ban could have caused but little hardship to a generally non-vegetarian populace. Ashoka is spoken of as a Buddhist emperor, and his reign as kind of Buddhist period in Indian history. But in the view of the people of the day, he was a Hindu monarch following one of the recognized sects. His own inscriptions bear ample witness to this fact. While his doctrines follow the middle path, his gifts are to the Brahmins, Shramanas, and others equally. His own name is Devanam Priya, the beloved of gods. Which gods? Surely the gods of the Aryan religion. Buddhism has no gods of its own. The Satavahanas, 73 AD to 218 AD, under the Satavahanas, Hinduism and Buddhism seem to have flourished equally. In the Nasik inscriptions, which record the dedication of a great Buddhist cave monastery, excavated at his own expense, Ushavadatta, the donor, speaks of his numerous charities to Brahmins also. Ushavadatta, the pious Buddhist merchant, also fed 100,000 Brahmins, Gautami Putra Satakarni, who declares himself to be the sole protector of Brahmins, records a benefaction for the Buddhists. Harsha. Apart from the unique biography of Harsha Charitra by Bana, we have the record left to us by the great Chinese pilgrim Yuan Shuang, whose life is one of the romances of world history. Yuan Shuang was, in matters unconnected with Buddhist miracles, an accurate observer, and his travels provide the first complete picture of India that we possess. He lived at Harsha's court, and we have therefore a trustworthy description of the life of the time. In his personal religion, Harsha was a follower of Buddha, but as in the case of other Indian Buddhist kings, he remained a Hindu. In his own books, it is to Shiva that he prays. Daily, he fed 500 Brahmins along with 1,000 Buddhist monks. At all ceremonial festivals of the king, Shiva and Vishnu received full honors along with Buddha. The pious Chinese doctor of laws himself bears witness to this fact. நான் அவ்வப்போது கூறி வருவதைப் போல அந்நிய மதங்கள் தோன்றுவதற்கு முன்பு நமது உலகம் பூராவும் நமது தெய்வ மதம் ஒன்றே இயங்கி வந்தது. ஆனால் உலகின் ஒரே பாஷையான சம்ஸ்கிருதம் மறைந்த பிறகு சுமார் 3.5 லட்சம் ஆண்டுகளுக்கு முன்பு வரையில் உலகில் சம்ஸ்கிருதம் ஒன்றே பேசப்பட்டு வந்தது. அந்தந்த நாட்டினர்கள் தெய்வங்களின் பெயர்களை தத்தமருடைய மொழிகளில் சூட்டி வந்தனர். இதை கண்ணுற்ற நவீன ஆசிரியர்களோ அத்தகைய ஒவ்வொரு நாட்டினரையும் தனித்தனி மதத்தினரைப் போல் குறிப்பிடும் வழக்கத்தை ஏற்றுவிட்டனர். அது தவறு. தெய்வங்களை ஆராதித்து வந்த மாயா, எகிப்து, பாபிலோனியா, இந்தியா, சைனா, ஜப்பான் போன்ற மற்ற ஏனையர்களின் மதத்தையும் தெய்வ மதம், டிவைன் ரிலிஜியன் ஆர் ரிலிஜியன் ஆஃப் த காட்ஸ் என்று குறிப்பிட வேண்டுமே தவிர ஒவ்வொரு மதத்தினர்களாக குறிப்பிடக்கூடாது. ஒவ்வொரு நாட்டினரிடையேயும் பழக்க வழக்கங்கள் மாறலாம், ஆனால் அது மதம் அல்ல. மதம் என்பது தெய்வ குறிக்கோளில் அடங்கியிருக்கும் கொள்கைகளாகும். எனவே ஆசிரியர்கள் இத்தகைய நாட்டினர்களை வெவ்வேறு ரிலிஜன்களைப் போல் குறிப்பிடாமல் கஸ்டம்ஸ் அண்ட் மேனர்ஸ் என்று குறிப்பிடுவதே பொருத்தமாகும். மேலே கூறப்பட்டிருக்கும் அதே தவறை ஆசிரியர்கள் புத்த மத பிரச்சனையிலும் புரிந்திருக்கிறார்கள். புத்தருடைய காலத்திற்கு பிறகு 900 ஆண்டுகள் வரையில், அதாவது குகைகளிலும் பாறைகளிலும் சித்திரங்களிலும் தெய்வங்களுக்கிடையில் புத்தர் அமர்த்தப்பட்டு வந்த வரையில் அவர் ஓர் இந்து அவதார புருஷராகத்தான் கருதப்பட்டு வந்தார். இத்தகைய காலம் வரையில் தெய்வங்களையும் ஆராதித்து வந்த பிரத்யேக தீவிர புத்த பக்தர்களை ஷமணாஸ் இந்து அரசர்கள் ஆதரித்து வந்தனர். தெய்வங்களை நிந்தித்து ஓர் தனி மதத்தினர்களாக மாறின பிறகு இந்து அரசர்கள் அவர்களை ஆதரிக்கவில்லை. இந்த உண்மையை ஊகிக்க இயலாத ஆசிரியர்களோ இந்து அரசர்கள் புத்த பிக்ஷுக்களை தெய்வ மதத்திய புத்த பக்தர்களை அல்ல ஆதரித்து வந்ததாக கூறி நம்மை குழப்பத்தில் ஆழ்த்தியிருக்கிறார்கள். அதாவது கிபி 4ஆம் நூற்றாண்டுக்கு முன்பே புத்த மதம் இயங்கி வந்ததைப் போல் காட்டியிருக்கிறார்கள். Buddhism. When Buddhism was first made known to Europe, not so very many years ago, by means of translations of philosophic writings dated 6 centuries after Buddha, profound astonishment was felt at taking cognizance of the fact that a religion which had brought 300 million souls under its law should acknowledge no God, should look upon the world as vain illusion, and should offer nothing but annihilation to the aspirations of man. The examinations of the bas reliefs with which the ancient monuments of India are covered proves that the religion of Buddha as practiced by the Hindus during a period of 1000 years, completely from the representation of it given to us by the written document. Not in books, in fact, but in a close study of the monuments themselves can be learned what Buddhism was in former days, and the message of these monuments deliver to us a totally different one from that contained in books. The monuments reveal that this religion, which modern scientists have distorted into atheistic belief, was on the contrary the most polytheistic of all religions. It is true that in the first Buddhist monuments, 18 to 20 centuries old, such as balustrades of Bharat, Sanchi Buddha Gaya, etc., the reformer figures solely as an emblem. Worship is accorded to the imprint of his feet and to the image of the tree under which he entered the state of supreme wisdom. But we shortly begin to see Buddha represented as a god having a place in all the sanctuaries. At first, he is represented as alone, or nearly so, as in the most ancient temples of Ajanta. Then he gradually appears in company with Brahmin gods, Indra, Kali, Saraswati, etc., as is to be seen in the Buddhist temples of the Ellora series of monuments. Completely lost a little later in the crowd of gods that he had at first dominated, he comes after a few centuries to be regarded as nothing more than an incarnation of Vishnu. From that day, Buddhism has been extinct in India. The disappearance, or rather than transformation, which has just been indicated in a few lines, required 1,000 years for its accomplishment. The numerous monuments which retrace its history were erected during the period extending from 3 centuries BC to the 7th of our era. During this long interval of time, Buddha was constantly worshipped by his followers as an all powerful God. Legends show him to us appearing before his disciples and according them favors. Legends and monuments are perfectly clear in their teachings, and had the study of Buddhism been primarily based upon them, an entirely different impression of the religion would have gained ground from that which now prevails. Unfortunately, the European writers on India had never visited the country, gaining all their knowledge of Buddhism from books, and ill chance had directed them upon the works of certain philosophical sects written 5 or 6 centuries after the death of Buddha, and containing little or nothing of the religion as actually practiced. Neither did the metaphysical speculations, which so astonished Europe by their depth, contain anything new. Now that the works of Indian writers are better known, the same theories have been found in the writings in the philosophical sects which developed during Brahminic period. Atheism, the contempt for life, morality as existing apart from religion, the world considered as illusion, all these had already appeared in certain philosophical works known under the names of Upanishads, of which there exist about 250, dating from all the epochs. In some are found the same doctrines that are presented in the philosophical writings of the Buddhists. Their authors also profess the doctrine of karma, the fundamental belief of Buddhism, as of all the religions of India, a doctrine according to which the acts accomplished by man in this life determine his condition in a future existence, this forming also the base of the code of Manu. The ultimate purpose of these successive reincarnations is absorption in the universal principle of things, the Brahma of which Manu speaks, parent to the nirvana of to the Buddhism. Then and then only is the soul absolved from reincarnation. For the attainment of this final state of absorption, Buddhists and Brahmins lay down the same rules: suppression of all desire, renunciation of the things of this world, and a life passed in solitude and contemplation. The philosophical theories of the age of Buddhism were thus the same as those held on Brahminic age which had preceded it. They are theories which developed parallel with the religion that was taught by the priests and practiced by the people, yet they differed from it essentially. To look upon these doctrines as being identical with Buddhism would be to commit an error as great as though we were to confound the theories of certain Upanishads with Brahmanism. Nevertheless, it is these philosophical utterances of some of the disciples of Buddha which have been received in Europe as Buddhism itself. It would seem to suggest itself at once as improbable that a religion counting 500 million believers could be founded solely on cold philosophical reasoning, but perhaps an error of such a nature is excusable in the case of learned men who, having passed their lives in the study of books, have had no time to pursue the deeper study of men. In 2 or 3,000 years, when the center of civilization shall have again shifted and our present languages and the books written in them have been forgotten, it is quite probable that some professor who has come upon the English language in his researches will translate the first works that come to his hand, such as Spencer's First Principles or Darwin's Origin of Species, and give them to the world as the beliefs professed by the Christian peoples in the 19th century. It is only necessary to observe Hindus closely to perceive that they are not the people to adopt the tenets of any religion that is without divinity. Make him learn by heart the catechism of the southern Buddhists recently composed with the assistance of Europeans, which teaches that the universe has no creator, that all is illusion, and you will see that that will not prevent him from feeling the need of still offering up worship to the great Buddha and all the gods of sanctuary. The most ancient of all books on Buddhism, the Lalita Vistara, written some 18 centuries ago, 6 centuries later than Buddha himself, contains a number of dissertations on the illusiveness and vanity of the things of this world. But to whom is Buddha teaching these truths? To the gods, principally to those innumerable gods of whom mention is made on every page and who, Brahma at their head, presided at the birth of the reformer who was to be God in his turn, accompanied him wherever he went, and finally came to offer him worship. Naturally, contradictions abound in this book, but they are no contradictions to the Hindu. His thought is formed in an entirely different mold from ours. For him, our European logic does not exist. Not a single one of his books, from the antique epics of the Ramayana and Mahabharata to the philosophical works previously referred to, is free from glaring contradictions. Doubtless, logic is not always lacking, but it is the feminine form which carries its deductions to their extreme limit without concerning itself with contradictions. Discussion for a long time as to whether, by reason of the commingling upon them of the emblems of Buddha and of Shiva, the celebrated monuments of Angkor were Buddhist or Brahmanic. No disputes on this point would have arisen if the scientists who examined the monuments of Cambodia had first studied those of India, of Nepal in particular. On these, they would have found the same intermingling of the two sets of emblems. They would also have observed the same peculiarity in a neighboring country, Burma. Mr. Wheeler, a former English functionary there, calls attention to the fact that the Burmans, Buddhists as is well known, also worshipped the Vedic gods, notably Indra and Brahma, and the king of Burma had many Brahmins at his court. He also makes a remark that the Mughal Khans of Asia, those in the neighborhood of Mount Atlai, worship the Vedic gods to this day. In order to place the theory of disappearance of Buddhism from India, it will be necessary to place ourselves back in the 7th century of the Christian era, or to discover a country which is undergoing a phase similar to that which India passed through at that epoch. Nepal, one of the cradle of Buddhism, is the region which has opposed the strongest resistance to the transforming forces by which it was menaced as soon as it came in contact with ancient Brahmanism, and has now reached the very moment of transformation at which Buddhism has become mingled with the Brahmanism without having been entirely swallowed up. The Hindu and Buddhist gods are so closely intermingled in the temples of Nepal that it is often impossible to determine to which religion a particular temple belongs. This peculiarity has been remarked, though nothing has been offered in the way of explanation by those English scientists who have made a study of Nepal. The fact, so inexplicable when not made clear by a study of the ancient monuments of India, is perfectly apparent when they have been given careful examination. Of one notes, as was said a little earlier, that the same confusion of divinities prevail everywhere at a certain period, and it is easy to comprehend how ancient temples could be attributed, even by learned Hindus, first to one religion and then to the other. The same explanation makes clear to us the fact, so strange at a first glance, of Buddhist, Jain, and Brahminic temples being constructed side by side during the same period. Looking now on the face when the two intermingled religions were on the point of merging into one, it will be at once comprehended how a sovereign can have distributed his liberalities between them with as much impartiality as a king of the Middle Ages displayed towards churches dedicated to different saints. There remains to us but the account of a single traveler relative to the epoch of which we speak, that of the Chinese pilgrim Huan Sang. And in this, we are told how a Hindu sovereign, on the occasion of some festivals, divides his generosity equally between the two dominant religions of that time, giving presents to Buddhist sectarians the first day, to those of Brahmanism the second. The phase had already been arrived at when the cults were entirely reconcilable, a phase which preceded that of their being united into one. The study of the religion of Nepal at the present time shows exactly how this fusion came about. Buddhism of the earlier period offers for the worship of its followers a supreme trinity. This comprises first Ali Buddha, who is its principal personage, representing spirit; second, Dharma, representing matter; third, Sangha, representing the visible world, produced by the union of spirit and matter. This trinity, nearly enough related as one sees to that of Brahmanism, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, has for symbol a triangle with a point at its center. This point is the emblem of Ali Buddha, looked upon definitively as the first cause. Below this superior trinity are placed the gods of the old Brahminic pantheon: Vishnu, Ganesha, Shiva, Lakshmi, etc. The most important of the temples of Nepal, notably that of Sambhunatha, are dedicated to Ali Buddha. In all, the Buddhist trinity Buddha, Dharma, Sangha is represented in the form of statue seated with legs crossed upon a lotus leaf, Buddha having two arms, Dharma, Sangha generally four. Of this trinity, Dharma alone, the goddesses of matter, is given the form of a woman. After the Buddhist trinity, the most common objects of worship are the images of the founder of Buddhism and of his predecessors, both mortal and divine. Next came the gods of Hindu pantheon: Mahenkal, avatar of Shiva; Kali, wife of Shiva; Indra, king of heaven; Garuda, god of birds, having a bird's head; Ganesha, divinity of wisdom, having an elephant's head, etc. The last is the most venerated, his image being found at the entrance to every temple, and it is with the worship of this purely Brahminic divinity that all the Buddhist ceremonies commence. The Hindu lingam has also been adopted by the Nepali Buddhists, but with the complete alteration of its significance. Instead of looking upon it as the male creative power of Shiva, it is held to be the emblem of lotus in which Ali Buddha manifested himself in the form of a flame. Its shape is also modified. 4 figures of Buddha are sculptured upon its lateral parts, and its summit is surmounted in the manner of Buddhist chaityas.